Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this meeting of Brighton and Hove City Council's Cabinet. If we could have quiet, please, at the back. I'd like to inform those present that this meeting is being webcast live and will be capable of repeated viewing. Do any members have any interest that they would like to declare in relation to any matters that are on today's agenda? No? Excellent. We have no part 2 items, so the press and public are welcome to stay for the whole meeting. And can I ask, does Cabinet agree to the minutes of the previous meeting as an accurate record? Agreed. Excellent. Okay, so turning to my communications. As we approach Armed Forces Day this Saturday, I'd like to begin by paying tribute to those brave men and women who have served and sacrificed themselves for our country. Armed Forces Day is an opportunity to show our appreciation to the currently serving troops, service families, reserves, veterans and cadets around the world. Among the celebrations and commemorative events taking place over the next few days here in Brighton will be an opportunity to mark the anniversary of the Battle of Boar's Head, known as the day that Sussex died, where 62 men from the city died in battle in the First World War, the city's greatest loss of life ever in one day. The significance of this battle for our city means that our administration has added it to our civic calendar, and I look forward to joining our mayor and anyone else that would like to attend at the plaque down at the Old Stein on Monday to mark the battle. This Saturday, there'll be celebrations at Downs Junior School, and at 2:55 precisely, you can enjoy a flyover of the legendary Spitfire fighter aircraft and listen out for the distinctive roar of its vintage engines at the Take Shelter Armed Forces Day celebration. We thank our armed forces for their bravery and service to our country. Today, Cabinet will be discussing important issues, including short-term lets, investing and improving the city's playing fields and sports pitches, our drug and alcohol strategy, and the council's current financial position. We'll vote on proposals to gather more data on the number of short-term lets in the city and lobby the government to introduce new powers to help us manage this sector. The number of short-term lets in Brighton and Hove is currently unclear, and with significant pressures on the supply of local housing and concerns over other associated problems, we're keen to better understand the landscape locally and act to address any challenges. It's important that we work together with the short-term let sector to build a better picture of the local situation, to lobby government for the powers we need to help manage it, and to do all we can to make sure we're striking the right balance between supporting our important visitor economy and minimising any negative effects on our residents. Our playing pitch strategy paper today will mean that we are considering ambitious plans to improve and invest in the city's playing fields and sports pitches over the next 15 years. As the city looks forward to hosting the Women's Rugby World Cup later this summer, enhancing our reputation as a major sporting city, demand for good quality sporting facilities looks set to surge even further. Access to community sports and physical activity facilities are vital for improving the health and well-being of our residents. We are already a really active city, and we know that, and that's something to be hugely celebrated. But we know that we could be even more active, ensuring our residents have access to the right sporting facilities in the right places so that they can stay physically and mentally well and lead happier and longer lives. Today, we'll also be discussing our drugs and alcohol strategy. Since my childhood, I've known that Brighton and Hove has severe challenges with drugs and high rates of drug deaths. And we see daily the harms associated with drug and alcohol use and abuse and the impact on individuals, their friends, families, and our communities here in the city. Drug and alcohol abuse can increase inequalities in health outcomes. It reduces the number of years that people spend in good health. It exacerbates poor mental health and can also lead to insecure housing, estrangement from family and friends, and employment issues. As a council intent on advancing health equity, reducing the harms of drug and alcohol is a priority for us. And finally, on our agenda today is our financial position, and we'll be considering the last outturn from the last financial year. It's been really positive to see that we ended the last financial year with a £1 million underspend, But we must be clear that it's taken a lot of hard work and effort to achieve this, with tough decisions and difficulties for our staff and unavoidable impacts on service delivery. However, it does mean we've entered the new financial year in a stronger position than we expected to a few months ago. This is a great start, but like all local authorities, we still have financial challenges and service pressure ahead, and there's more we need to do to build our reserves and ensure that we remain financially resilient as a council. And finally, as a listening council, I've been pleased to see the number of opportunities we're giving residents to have their say on the future of Brighton and Hove since this cabinet last met last month. In the last week alone, we've launched consultations on ambitious plans for active travel improvements on the A259, the expansion of our electric vehicle network, the use of disposable barbecues, balloons and lanterns in our public spaces, and our city transport plan for the next decade. Also, over the course of the last month, we have celebrated Windrush Day, Refugee Week, and we've hosted a fantastic anti-racist education conference. This council will always be one, as long as we're in administration, that invests in anti-racist education and anti-racism and proudly flies our flags of inclusivity from our city town halls. We've also refurbished our basketball court on the seafront. We've gone out to consultation on the design of a new swimming pool in Withdean and improvements to the multi-use games area. We've announced that we are going to be reopening Kings Road paddling pool. We've recently gone out to consultation on improving Elder Place corridor. Our adult education services have been judged good by Ofsted. And this Monday, and please spread this message far and wide, anybody that is listening, we will be expanding our plastics recycling in the city. So plastic pots, tubs and trays from this Monday you can put in your household recycling, in communal recycling, in household recycling, and we're adding them to our collections. Also, over the last month, we have run a Love Your Cervix campaign, which is aiming to improve the take-up of smear testing by women and people with cervixes in the city. I have recently had my own smear test, and I really encourage anybody receiving notification from the NHS to take it up. I know that people have incredibly busy lives, and it's not many people's favourite thing to go and do, but it's vitally important. It can prevent cancer, and I'd really encourage people to take up the opportunity when you get your notification from the NHS. So without further ado, I'm now going to turn to the business of today. I propose that all items are reserved for discussion. Does the Cabinet agree? Thank you. I can confirm that we've received no public engagement items for this meeting. So that then brings us on to questions from members. Questions can be found published in the addendum for today's meeting. We've got 15 minutes in total set aside for member questions. And once we reach time, I'll move us on to the next item, and there will be written responses for any remaining questions. We've received 15 member questions for this meeting, so I'll rotate through those with those members that are in attendance, asking each of you your first two questions as the fairest way to manage them. And then if there's time, I'll take further questions in rotation. So I'd like to invite Councillor Hill to come and ask her questions.
Thank you. So my first, well, actually all of my questions are on the drug and alcohol strategy. My first question is, how do cuts to the Sussex Integrated Care Board or Sussex NHS funding, as well as our own public health team, affect the ability to carry out this strategy?
Councillor Allen.
Thank you, Councillor Hill, for your question. Thanks to our Labour government, there has been no cut to the public health grant, which funds the drug and alcohol programme. This has enabled increases in service capacity, workforce development and harm reduction initiatives. The Drug and Alcohol Treatment Recovery Grant is in its final year and is scheduled to finish in March 2026. And we are awaiting confirmation of the future of the grant going forward. The strategy that we're discussing today explicitly acknowledges the challenge of future funding uncertainty and commits to adapting delivery plans should funding levels change.
My second question is, does the Cabinet consider the criminalisation of cannabis possession in particular to be beneficial to the harm reduction which the strategy alludes to? I feel this causes far more harm, and the priority should be on tackling county lines and working with Sussex Police on those issues.
Thank you, Councillor Hill. No, prohibition is a failed dogma. Hence, this strategy takes a public health and harm reduction approach rather than a criminal justice approach. Priority is placed on early intervention, reducing stigma, and targeting high-risk supply chains, particularly where organised criminal exploitation like county lines is evident. The strategy aims to divert individuals from the criminal justice system into treatment, especially young people. While cannabis enforcement continues under national law, our local focus remains on reducing harm and safeguarding rather than on punitive approaches.
Thanks, that's really positive to hear. My last question is, earlier this year, Glasgow has opened a safer drug consumption facility which reduces HIV transmission as well as the likelihood of death by overdose. This has worked also in places like Switzerland for many years. Would you agree that it's a shame that consideration was not given to this in the strategy?
Thank you. Consideration was given to this, but it was quickly discounted as a serious proposal. Therefore, the strategy does not include safe consumption rooms as part of its action plan. Firstly, they are illegal in England. To open one would require an accord between local partners and the police, which is not forthcoming. The Home Office and the Association of Police Officers are clear they would not support drug consumption rooms where illicit drug use and supervision of drugs would take place. On top of this, there is a frankly silly situation where the City Council would facilitate the use of serious drugs, but would have to intervene if the user were to drink alcohol or smoke tobacco, as these are banned on local authority premises. The Glasgow Centre is funded by the Scottish Government a tune of 2.3 million per year. That is just above the revenue earmarked to pay off the I360 Green Party tax in our city. I'd be curious to know how the Green Group would propose raising these funds for this venture each year. So our administration is working to mitigate drug harm without spending 2.3 million annually on an illegal operation. I would hope that you would do the opposite.
Thanks, Councillor. Sorry, are those all of your questions, Councillor Hill? Yes. And I should have explained at the outset, actually, of the meeting that Councillor Allen is currently covering for Cabinet Member Michi Alexander, who on Friday underwent open heart surgery at the Royal Sussex County Hospital. I'm very pleased to say that the operation went very well. She is recovering very well. She has now left hospital and she's expected to be off for a couple of months. And during that time, Councillor Allen, Councillor Daniel and myself are covering different parts of her portfolio. Thank you, Councillor Hill. I'd like to invite Councillor Sykes.
Thank you very much, Chair. A couple of questions about the TBM paper. Congratulations on the underspend for the last financial year. The 23-24 provisional outturn reported almost 300,000 overspend under City Clean due to increased vehicle cost within fleet due to purchased vehicle delays and recent sabotage. So that was last year. This year, the equivalent line reported a almost over 1.5 million overspend under the equivalent line. Which is obviously a massive increase over the last financial year. Does the finance lead expect this item to be better controlled in the new financial year? Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Sykes. And obviously, as you'll remember, and every year you get ups and downs within a budget, and so any underspend, or when you come in budget overall, there's likely to be line items that have underspends and overspends. But it's important that you've obviously called out this individual line item, which is worth looking at. There's a significant amount of work going on within environmental services to improve the service, but also manage the budget effectively. There's a programme in place to replace vehicles across the service, which will improve reliability, but also reduce maintenance and vehicle hire costs, although this will take some time to be implemented fully. To answer your question, I'd certainly like to see this area come in much closer to planned budget for 25-26, but it's probably a fool's errand for any finance lead to promise that any individual line item will be exactly on budget, but that's certainly the aim of the service, and there's a lot of work going on to try and achieve that.
Thank you very much. second question is about the temporary accommodation costs, and just to sort of put a bit of colour. I mean, so the budget last year was 3 million. It went up to sort of 4,281. The budget for the year just passed was 6 million and went up to 9 million. I mean, these are frightening changes in the context of our council revenue budget. And I've just the question. So, what modelling have you done to understand the impact of the housing crisis on council finances over the next years? Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. And you're dead right. Every year that pressure has been growing, and really that reflects, as you imply, the severe pressure on the national housing crisis, which drives both demand but also the expenditure, the cost of accommodation, particularly spot purchase. Like many councils, we've got limited supply of affordable housing and a growing number of households in need. To answer your question, what the council does, it conducts monthly in-year forecasting and projections across the medium-term financial plan based on trend analysis of homelessness demand and TA. This includes scenario modelling that factors in inflation, increases in demand, unit cost pressures and some supply constraints to support that decision making. This is challenging given the pressures in recent years and the volatility of activity in the market and unit costs. Our broader commitment is obviously to prevent homelessness through early intervention, targeted support and partnership working. We're considered a leader in homelessness prevention and consistently do better than other South East authorities, but against that prevailing wind of a really difficult housing crisis, which is why it's so important and significant that the government have announced a doubling of their capital investment in affordable housing. It'll be now up to 39 billion over 10 years, as I say, roughly double what was previously the case for investment in affordable housing. But we know that will take time. It's not going to happen overnight. You can't build houses overnight. They take a while, but we think that is the right investment for the government to try and change the structure of the housing market in the country. Within our own strategy, we're trying to deliver 2,000 new affordable homes by 2029, which will be a big step forward and a help. I should say, and be in the interests of early transparency, the trend you've observed, unfortunately, will continue. And in TBM that we publish next month, we are going to see very significant pressures on TA, both in terms of the number of families seeking help and for which we owe a duty, and indeed the unit costs of the market. So unfortunately, the message is that this is going to be an area that we're going to have to keep really, really working on, and will be a source of pressure to this council for some time to come.
Thank you very much for your questions, Councillor Hill and Councillor Sykes. There are no matters referred to Cabinet for consideration today, so that brings us on to member representations. And I believe that we have a representation from Councillor Hill on item 11, which is the drug and alcohol strategy. Once you've taken your seat, Councillor Hill, you have up to 3 minutes to speak.
Thanks. Firstly, just want to say thank you to officers for their work on this strategy, and also to best wishes to Mitchie with her recovery. To respond to Councillor Allen, on the 2.3 million, I think it's important to think about prevention first as a strategy. Ultimately, if the centre is able to be seen to save lives in Glasgow, that is something that is worth that kind of expenditure. We spend a lot of money, quite rightly, on things like HIV prevention in this country because it has a long-term benefit. So whilst I do accept that there are significant challenges in terms of the legality of this, that's something that has, been attempted. There's been challenges by police and crime commissioners, like in North Wales. The former Plaid Cymru police and crime commissioner tried to have this implemented because of, high levels of heroin deaths in North Wales. This is something that I think should be seriously considered. And I think that, responding with I360 sort of, oh, yeah, this isn't that a serious proposal, feels a bit dismissive. So I just emphasise that it's important that we do, talk to the potential of this proposal around drug consumption facilities. I do appreciate, though, that there are a lot of legal constraints that you're under, so I don't imagine that this is just an easy thing that you could just do. I just think that it's worth fully considering. To speak a bit more to the strategy itself, Again, I'm really happy to hear what you're talking about in terms of reprioritizing and just recognizing that, cannabis possession and so on isn't the main priority. We also need to recognize that there are issues within, say, Sussex Police around stop and search. So there's, I believe, 8 times you're more likely, if you're from a black or racially minoritized background, to be affected by stop and search with Sussex Police than for other people, and that's something that specifically relates to preconceived notions around drugs and in relation to that. And so I think I'm concerned that the strategy itself says that they did not reach as many people from black and minoritized backgrounds in terms of the engagement of the creation of the strategy. And there is an intention, I believe, to have future engagement, but given that the strategy, it sounds like, will be ratified today, I would be concerned about the fact that you're doing that priority, that engagement, which you're saying is a priority, after it, when it should be the thing that leads and informs the strategy itself. So I do feel as though there's issues in terms of how the strategy has been created, and I would have liked to have seen also, given it's Armed Forces Day, kind of a bit more of a mention about how specifically veterans and other groups could be supported, because we know that with PTSD there's a specific link between that and drug use. So more work is needed in terms of understanding the needs of those communities, as well as for expats, asylum seekers, refugees and migrants. So I think that there's a need here to work upon the fundamentals in terms of a co-production of this policy, but I am glad to hear harm reduction being specifically spoken to, as I think that's something that we do have shared views on. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Councillor Hill. Okay, we now turn to our substantive items for today. And on part 7 of the agenda, colleagues will see the short-term lets item. I'm really pleased that we have with us our esteemed chair of the Place Overview Scrutiny Committee, Councillor Amanda Evans. And I'm going to invite Councillor Evans to come and introduce this item to us, as this came about from the work of her committee to investigate and examine the issue. Councillor Evans, welcome.
Thank you. Yes, so we've been talking about this subject for years in Brighton and Hove, and there are several people in the room, Jill, Alan, myself, who've tried to find solutions to this issue before. We started our task and finish group last October from the premise that the exponential rise in the number of STLs in tourist destinations like Brighton and Hove causes a tension between our successful visitor economy, which we love and wish to keep growing, and on which many jobs depend, and our housing crisis, with short-term lets definitely having a negative impact on housing supply and cost, particularly in the private rental market, as well as on community cohesion, with problems like antisocial behaviour caused by some party houses, as people call them. So we talked to everyone that we could, and over the years the picture has kind of changed somewhat from the last time that we tried to work on it, in that as much as there are trade associations and there is a change of government, and our government are now trying to take forward various different bits of legislation in this field. And so we talked to MPs, we talked to councillors from different councils, we talked to planning officers from various places, we talked to people who have exactly the same regulatory regime as us, subject to the same laws, and want various different things changed in the legislation if they can get them. And we also talked to people in the devolved areas, both in London boroughs and in Wales and Scotland, who have a different regulatory regime and therefore handle things very differently, with some with great success and some with problems that we can learn from. And it was a very interesting process. We didn't know half as much as we thought we knew on the subject, but we came to some conclusions and made some recommendations as a result of all the people that we talked to and all the things that we learnt, and which are obviously contained in your reports, Cabinet. And The difference, I think, now is that there's more information out there, and we were clearer about what would help. And we became clearer through the process of the working group about what would help. I mean, the very first thing that would help would be to have more data, because under current legislation, there are a lot of people who are breaking current law and may not even be aware they're breaking current law, in as much as that they're not registered as businesses, they're not paying business rates or business taxes or business waste disposal arrangements or anything else, but they're not aware of that necessarily, and we don't know where they are. We can't enforce legislation if we don't know where these people are, and there are at any given moment between 4,000 and 6,000 adverts for full-time short-term lets in this city, and only 400 odd of them are registered as businesses. So it gives you some idea of the scale of it's been estimated by Rachel Maskell MP, who has a private members bill on this subject, that is due to have a second reading in a week or so, but may yet be timed out. But she estimates that there are, from her research, that there is £6 billion in unpaid tax in this industry, which is a lot of money and could pay for us to have more resources to manage where there are breaches. So we're still aware, as we have been over the years, that we need changes in legislation to make a significant difference, although it will also make a significant difference if we start working on putting some of the planning controls that we can take, even under current legislation, into our next iteration of City Plan. So that's why some of the recommendations are concerning City Plan. But also we do feel, as a result of this work that we've done, the two different government departments and the private members bill all asked, the people working on all of those things in MHCLG and the Department for Culture, Media and Sport, asked for copies of our report. And that has led to me going up to talk to the hearings about the private members bill, and our planning officers and visitor officers being invited to go to be part of a steering group at DCMS. So, so we do feel like we're part of the national conversation now, at least, which might help. So I recommend our recommendations to you and hope that you'll support them. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Councillor Evans. And I just want to put on record our huge thanks to the work of you and your committee on this. I think, as you've outlined, it really is quite trailblazing work, and to be so involved in the national discussion now on the future of regulation in this area, I think is really significant. And I think Brighton Hove clearly has a huge amount to contribute, and you've really stepped up and shown that. So thank you so much. I'm going to invite Councillor Taylor now to come in.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Evans, and echo those thanks to you and everyone on the Task and Finish group that looked at this, and obviously the officers that supported it. I understand and accept that opposition councillors didn't support our move to a cabinet system, but one of the things from the outset that I thought could work really well is not just scrutinising decisions being made, which is important, but proactive scrutiny and Task and Finish. And I think the output of this has validated that. And personally, I'd like to see more resources for Task and Finish on other topics, and something that we may well be able to explore. In terms of the substance of the report and the recommendations, as Councillor Evans has suggested, we've got to take a step back and remember that we have one of the worst housing crises in the entire country. We have thousands of people on the housing waiting list. We have hundreds of families in temporary accommodation, and we have families moving out of the city, and graduates and people starting their careers moving out of the city because they just can't afford to live here. We have the somewhat ludicrous situation where homeless families and families who come to the council are being placed in hotels and guest houses, and at the same time we have houses that were built for people to live in permanently being rented out for short-term lets. That's obviously the wrong way round. We can't have families in hotels and guest houses as homeless. We need them in houses. So within that context, I think it's really important that the government and the council look at this issue really seriously. I want to be clear, as Councillor Sankey said in her opening comments, this is not about demonising all short-term lets. Short-term lets have existed long before Airbnb existed. You can, for decades, you've been able to rent a house as a way of having a holiday. And also, hotels are not always exactly what you want for a holiday. If you've got a biggish family, it's not always possible to get connecting rooms. And so having that kind of property is an important part of the tourist market. And as a reminder, we're a major tourist city. And this is not about saying we're anti-tourist at all. We're very, very pro-tourism. This is about saying, have we currently got the right balance in the use of what were built as residential houses for use for the local population and for short-term lets? My sense is the answer is no, we haven't got that balance right. And to Councillor Evans's point, the more substantive point is we don't know whether we've got the balance right because we don't know what the data is. At any one time, you can look how many houses are posted on Airbnb or wherever else, but you don't really know how many are being used full-time for short-term lets. And so that's why I think the recommendations are really important. And as Councillor Sankey says, being part of the national conversation is really important. I'm just going to quickly go through each of the recommendations and effectively give a sort of political duet, which is Councillor Evans is going to propose them and I'm going to respond and say what we're doing with them. So recommendation 1 is about lobbying the Secretary of State for a new planning use class for short-term lets, which is agreed, and we will be doing that. The second one is again about lobbying the Secretary of State about potential licensing scheme, which has been talked about and muted, but we certainly would support that. And again, we very happy to support that recommendation. Number 3 is similarly about licensing registration scheme and the ability to have data sharing, which, as Councillor Evans says, the data is pretty important for us to get a true understanding of the picture. So we certainly support that. Number 4 is about supporting, if it were to come in, a licensing scheme and being part of one. And I think that is an important recommendation, and we should do that. Clearly, that is subject to the overall parameters of any scheme and the resourcing involved. As we've seen with other licensing schemes, sometimes you have a bit of a chicken and egg situation, which you may have to employ the team first to do the licensing, and then the fees may end up sort of paying for the team, but we'll have to see how that works. But certainly in principle, we're supporting that, and we'll wait to see what comes from government. Number 5 is about additional planning resources for investigations. That one, in theory, yes, agreed, although we will have to wait to see whether that licensing scheme comes in. At the moment, as everyone knows, the financial constraints of the council are very tight, and so we can't necessarily put any resources now, but in the future that may be possible. Number 6 is about having a cabinet member oversight and a named officer, which is agreed and will certainly become more relevant as and when powers come in. Number 7 is about looking at other initiatives, and it specifically calls out parking schemes in relation to short-term lets. And so I think the response there and recommendation from Cabinet is yes, but we will have to look at it very, very carefully and do the relevant modelling. Clearly in our city, we have zones that are very, very tight parking zones with almost no capacity. So we'd have to figure out what giving spaces and allocating spaces for in relation to short-term lets, the impact would be, but we will certainly look at that. Recommendations 8, 9 and 10, as Councillor Evans suggested, are the ones that we can directly control locally without government changes or legislative changes, and they all relate to things that we could put into our city plan. And obviously the timing of that is good because we're in the middle of preparing for city plan. The first one is looking at clauses potentially in leases for new builds, and that they couldn't be used for full-time short-term lets. The view is that, yes, that could be explored and potentially via Section 106 conditions. And so we're accepting that recommendation and we'll be feeding that into city plan and trying to see whether we can draft a policy on that. Number 9 is about zones in the city where you could have a zoning approach for short-term lets. I believe they have that in Blackpool, which has been successful. And indeed, they've been able to uphold that process. In other words, where they make decisions and it's been appealed, they've upheld it. But again, we will need to explore that through city plan and potentially develop a policy that goes into city plan. And then number 10 is an interesting one which relates to hotels and guest houses. And I know Councillor Robbins has talked about this, is that some guest houses have sort of no longer become viable for whatever reason. It's actually quite difficult to transfer back to residential straight away if they're not working as a guest house. And so some of these guest houses therefore operate as Airbnbs. And so again, we'll explore whether we could change the policy framework through city plans so that it's easier to move from guest house to residential. And that might be one way to release up some residential. Number 11 is about a website and having information all in one place. One of the things that I've certainly heard in our ward is that people are somewhat confused where to go, whether it's student lets or short-term lets, or whether they don't even know whether something's being used as a short-term let or an Airbnb. And so the recommendation is to have a website or a page that collates a lot of this information and links to other places. So we would suggest that we do accept that, but we'll need to explore exactly how to do that. And then the last one is about an out-of-hours phone number for STL providers. We say in our response to that that could be possible, although likely as part of a licensing scheme where we'd be able to enforce that or force them to do that, although it wouldn't be impossible for some of these providers to do it proactively themselves, and perhaps something that we could lobby them on. So in conclusion, Chair, all of these recommendations really, really important and thoughtful. Essentially all of them are accepted, but will have to be implemented in different stages based on the national framework and the city plan. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Councillor Taylor, for talking us through those detailed, comprehensive, and I think a really balanced set of measures, some that we can start getting on with immediately and others that are a more medium and longer term strategy. I've got Councillor Miller.
Thank you, Chair. As Cabinet Member for Tourism, I'd like to say how much I welcome these recommendations, because at the moment, it's a very, very unequal playing field. It's very much tilted in favour of the unregistered, unsupervised short-term let provider who is not complying with legislation, who is not providing a safe and secure space for their guests. And actually, at the moment, one could say that both those registered businesses, those 400, plus the hotels and guest houses, are actually being penalised for the fact that they are paying business rates, they are disposing of their waste appropriately. And so the one recommendation that I would say we need to be careful about accepting is recommendation 7. I think if we offer that, it has to be at the very end of this process. Because at the moment, one of the advantages that hotels have, bearing in mind they have a lot of extra costs because of the hoops they have to jump through, is that a lot of them have their own parking. And I feel if we offer parking to short-term lets before we have a really rigorous, very, very tightly controlled system for managing them with good, strong licensing and strong enforcement, I fear that we will again give the unregistered provider too much of an advantage. And I think that's the one concern I have. But otherwise, I feel they are very much in favour of supporting our tourism sector, because we need the beds, but we need them to be provided in a safe and secure way, which doesn't undermine existing businesses who are complying with legislation, who are doing their best to be responsible corporate citizens in the city. So I very much welcome this. Thank you.
Can I just add that I think that the one place we came across, the detail is in the report itself, but the one place we came across where they are using a parking scheme specifically for short-term lets, it's done through the providers of the short-term lets. So it is only the legitimate registered ones that are able to access that scheme, because you're absolutely right, of course, that there are those 400 odd who are registered, some with multiple properties, and those are the responsible end of the market. And they are being penalised at the moment. And they are, to answer Bella's point, they are actually already at least one provider with several properties is using a security firm a private security firm who we spoke to. They came to one of our evidence gathering meetings, and they are providing an out of hours phone number so that they can deal with any problems as they arrive, with kind of stag and hen parties, for example, or any antisocial behaviour that's going on. So yeah, those people who are compliant with all current legislation are being penalised by the less salubrious end of the market. So you're correct.
Thank you. That was really helpful, and thank you for the sort of further clarification and explanation, Councillor Evans. I've got Councillor Okins, and then I'll come to Councillor Mooton.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Thanks, Amanda. I think I echo a lot of what's been said already. I think this is a very good example of what a task and finish group can achieve. I note from the report that the group spoke to 34 officers from other local authorities, among other people, so it's obviously been very thorough. I did have a question, but actually, as always, Councillor Taylor is so comprehensive in his responses that he's answered it for me preemptively. So thanks for that. But just to sort of echo, I guess that we all get the appeal of Airbnb, right? It gives people more options, and we want people to come and visit the city. We want them to have options of the type of accommodation they stay in. When they do come, but as has been said already, it is all backwards, where we've got tourists staying in family homes and homeless families staying in hotels and everything. The original purpose of Airbnb, as far as I remember it, was make a little bit of cash from a spare room occasionally for a visiting business traveller, or perhaps rent your home out while you're on holiday or whatever. It certainly was not. The original purpose was not to say to landlords potentially, well, why don't you kick out your permanent tenants and start up an illicit underground guest house that doesn't pay any council tax or business rates. So we certainly do have a significant problem with it in the city, but as you rightly say, we don't know how big that problem is, or really where we start in tackling it, because we don't have that data. So I think it's really good to see such a long and comprehensive list of recommendations, and as has been said already, the opportunity with the city plan consultation is a really good moment to stop and take a look at this, and it's great to see that we're now, as the Chair said earlier, front and centre of that national conversation. So very good work, and looking forward to seeing us hopefully making a dent in this, because my general sense is that there must be an interplay between the the pressure on our housing crisis in the city and the number of short-term holiday lets. How big that interplay is to be debated, but I can't see any world in which the two aren't linked. So yeah, thank you.
I'd just add that I am really glad to see that two government departments, as well as there's two private members' bills out there. I think there's a Lib Dem one as well that's come up in the last few weeks. But I'm really glad to see the government taking an interest in this, because they've got such an ambitious house building programme, because there's a national housing crisis as well as a local housing crisis here. And Jacob's right that we're one of the worst places. But if you build 1 million new houses a year, it's not much use to you if 90% of the ones that you're building in tourist areas like Brighton and Hove end up being short-term lets. So local areas must be given more ability to manage their own areas.
Thank you, Councillor Evans. Fully agree with that. I've got Councillor Mooton, and then I've got Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Evans and Councillor Taylor, for your presentations. Very, very appreciate that. And it is quite concerning, as you rightly pointed out, that we simply don't know the number of short-term net sets in the city. The 400 which you are registered are very helpful and responsible, and it does help us a lot, and I see the real clear need for having a list, so we know where we are and what demand there might be on those properties in that area, particularly in services. Now, Councillor Miller referenced recommendation number 7 around the parking and allowing some parking for short-term let visitors. One thing we've done as administration, early in our administration, was realising that it hadn't really been done for possibly 20 years since our first controlled parking zones were set up around 2 decades ago, a comprehensive parking review for the city. And that's very much been data-led, and we're very aware of some zones, but Councillor Taylor made reference to this, particularly zones Z, Y and M, where there's essentially a very high demand for parking permits, with a waiting list for zones, which we're doing our best to reduce. But to get data to exactly the demand for parking in each part of the city is absolutely vital. And therefore, to understand if the short-term lets require parking and how much parking they require, if it's one permit a month or is it one permit a day, that's a scale we need to know, so we can then map this properly and build that into our parking review, and if need be, reflect that in our controlled parking zone strategy. So I do really welcome the registration in some way of this, so we can actually map this demand and work with those people that have these short-term lets to ensure there is right services, including parking for their visitors, and we can properly manage this so it doesn't impact negatively on residents who are waiting for their own parking permit, for instance.
Thanks very much, Councillor Mouton. Councillor Williams.
Thank you, and I have campaigned on this before I was a councillor and while I was a councillor for some years, so I'm really pleased that we are addressing this, and I really want us to tackle this and really get a move on doing so, and I hope government listens to us, which I'm sure they are, which is heartening to hear. I'm just looking at your executive summary on the housing market and the studies that are telling us that it doesn't really have an impact on the housing market. I find that incredibly difficult to believe. I don't know where they're getting their information from to say such a silly thing, I'm afraid to say. The last data scrape that I got when I was researching it, which was about a year and a half ago, and I'm sure it's even got worse since then, in our area, over 4,000 Airbnb type lets were available at any given time, and 75% of those were whole homes. And I should imagine it's probably more. That's the ones that was found. That's a huge amount of homes that people could live in, thinking about how many people that we're dealing with. Over 2,000 people came to us last year looking for help with potential homelessness. So for me, if we could turn this around, this would make a significant impact on a human level to many people in our city as we are now. So I really welcome it, and I look forward to us at speed taking this on. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Any other comments or questions for Councillor Evans or Councillor Taylor? No, in which case that just leaves me to ask, does Cabinet agree to accept the recommendations as detailed in the report and laid out by Councillor Taylor just now? Agreed unanimously. Thank you, everybody. That brings me on to our playing pitch strategy for 25. Thank you very much, Councillor Evans. Really appreciate you joining us. Playing pitch strategy for 25 to 41. And I'm going to ask our Cabinet member, Councillor Robbins, to introduce this item, please. Thanks, Alan.
Thank you very much, Chair. And firstly, let me pay tribute to the amount of work that has gone into this. There's always the amount of work that goes into this. And a lot of it was by Laura Spence, who's not with us today because she's on annual leave. Whether she needed to take a long rest after writing this, I don't know, but she's not with us. But I'd introduce you to Mike Harris, who I think is your first time here, Mike, isn't it? Yeah, Mike's first time here, who supported me today. So be gentle with us when it comes to questions.
Welcome.
What we're asking today is that Cabinet approve and adopt a playing pitch strategy from 25 to 41, as set out in Appendix 1, and the Cabinet approves the recommendations, including a longer-term need for more pitch provision in all future place planning. The new 15-year playing pitch strategy was researched throughout 2024 to access Brighton and Hove playing pitches and auxiliary sports facilities. Pitches reviewed included the outdoor cricket, football, hockey and rugby, and artificial pitches available for community use. The new strategy provides guidance for managing and improving pitches in response to the local community demands, both now and in the future. By producing and adopting this strategy, it will allow us to attract external sporting funding, as well as supporting citywide planning. The strategy has been agreed by each of the primary sports associations' national governing bodies and in partnership with Sport England. Through the new strategy, the Council aims to deliver pavilion and pitch improvements across the city, introduce further community asset transfers and encourage community use agreed across the educational sites. This presents the Cabinet with a view for the Council to, number one, approve the formal adopter strategy as a Council document and progress actions as outlined in section 7 of the document. The key findings is the increase in demand for playing pitches since 2016, with a notable increase in women and girls participation. The area of study covered in the entire Brighton and Hove, as well as the University of Brighton, the University of Sussex, which falls just outside of the city boundaries. The playing pitch strategy found that more pitches are needed. Facilities need to be improved to meet both current and future demand. In cricket, there has been a total increase of 57% in cricket teams, with the greatest increase in adult women's teams from 2 to 7 teams. That's 350%. And youth girls teams from 6 to 12. That's 100% since 2016. Across football, there has been an increase of 45 women's and girls teams, representing an increase of 433% since 2016. Rugby has experienced a growth in youth rugby with 11 new teams, including 2 new girls teams. It is also anticipated there will be an increase in women and girls rugby following the 2025 Women's World Rugby Cup, which Brighton is one of the host cities. To facilitate this demand and support further growth, additional pitches and improvements to auxiliary facilities are recommended. More detailed analysis of specific sports findings can be found in section 4.3, 4.4, 4.5 and 4.6 of this report. The Council's capital programme already includes a level of capital budget to deliver against some of the priorities, but will not be sufficient for all of them. This budget is currently funded from corporate borrowing budgets and is included in the Council's financial projections. Implementing the strategy will provide a clarity and a degree of certainty for external funding bids to be made and contribute to either reducing the financial cost associated with the existing capital budget or unlocking further investment beyond that approved by the budget. If the playing pitch strategy were not adopted, there would be no clear action plan for management and the enhancement of playing pitches or sports facilities. Through adoption and implementation of this strategy, the Council has a leading role in enabling access to sporting opportunities at a cost that is acceptable to the wider community. This strategy allows the Council to continue this commitment to active participation in sports for all. So we recommend it to you and are open to any sort of questions. As I say, Mike's only been with us a short time, but I'm sure can do his best to answer any questions.
Thanks very much, Alan, and welcome to Mike, and thanks to all the officers involved in putting this together. It is ambitious, it looks really holistic. It's fantastic to see the huge growth in use of our facilities, particularly by women and girls, as you highlighted, Councillor Robbins. I've seen the shift in my own lifetime. When I was growing up, it was all about netball for girls, and now my 5-year-old girl is regularly playing football, loving it, doing very well, along with many girls in her class, and it's just completely normal that girls are getting involved in football, which is great. And so I think really important to highlight the need for those ancillary facilities to really ensure we're enabling it. It's not right that our facilities haven't kept pace with that growth. So putting a focus on that, I think, is really, really important. And particularly as well, I'd like to highlight the idea of seeking those community use agreements with our education sites. So often in a tightly packed city like ours, where we're trying to do everything, build houses, have playing pitches, etc., we've got to ensure that our assets are being used to their capacity and really doubling up their purpose as well where we can. Questions and comments for Councillor Robbins? I've got Councillor Rokins.
I'll turn it.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Councillor Robbins, and welcome, Mike. Good to have you here. I think it's great, but I want to shout out the sport of hockey, which is covered by the playing pitch strategy. I grew up in Northampton, and my secondary school was, I would say, borderline pathologically obsessed with rugby, and certainly forced me to play rugby against my will on a weekly basis. I had the sort of misfortune of being tall but also very skinny, which I still am, and they made me play a position called second row, and I've done my best to block out these painful memories, but essentially what second row does is when there's the throw in from the side, you get hurled up into the air to catch the ball, at which point everyone else on the pitch piles on top of you until they've successfully wrestled the ball away from you. So very traumatic indeed for me. I felt that hockey was a much fairer sport for me because I was allowed to carry around a big wooden stick, which I felt gave me a good chance. So I'm pleased to see that in the playing pitch strategy. The increase in women and girls uptake in some of these sports is, I mean, it's 400 and something % in football. I mean, it's amazing, isn't it? It really is a massive success story. I've got a couple of young teenage cousins who are just obsessed and playing like really at quite a high level now. So that's amazing, and obviously we expect to see that continue. Some other really interesting things in there. The Sport England survey from whenever that was, last year I think it was, showing 79% of our residents doing 150 plus minutes each week. I mean, that seems like a lot. I don't know who they were asking, but that's amazing, and it really demonstrates, well, I suppose it links to what I was about to say, which is the report also highlights that many of our facilities are at or over capacity, and it's no wonder that's the case if our residents are so active. So clearly having a strategy that not only stays on top of that, but allows for future growth in other sports as well. And of course, we're seeing other sports. You know, someone mentioned paddle earlier, I think. So, you know, that we're seeing new sports coming online, but also sort of other sports gaining in popularity. So clearly, we need a clear strategy in the sort of medium to long term to deliver what we need. Also, just want to say that I'm really pleased to see there's a good focus on prioritising these facilities in some of our more deprived communities and really making sure that that's very high on the list. So yeah, very supportive, and mainly I just wanted the excuse to give you my hockey anecdote. So over to you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Okins, and my sympathies for those days. That does sound truly awful. I've got...
Can I just respond?
Yeah, of course, Councillor Robinson.
And thank Councillor Okins for allowing us to enter his own personal hell. And I'm sure we can get you some counselling at a later date, but I think what you're saying is exactly right. It is fantastic, the increase, particularly in women and girls sports, and to see them on level pegging with male sports and not sort of looked upon as a sort of novelty or something that is there. And Mike and I met last week along with Kerry Taylor from the sports facility with two women who are looking to promote a special coaching for girls, and particularly girls, teenage girls, to sort of include the changes that they're going through at the same time as the sporting coaching. And one of the women we met very casually mentioned to us that she played football for Brazil, and she won my lifetime's admiration. So it is, and it's great to see that you know, people treated as level terms. So and thanks again, Tim, for your recollection.
I've got Councillor Allen, and then
Thank you, Chair. Similarly, it's only by luck that I was born a few years after Councillor Taylor. Otherwise, me and him might have been facing off on the rugby pitch at Long Hill, and we'll take a poll later as to who would come out with more bruises. But what I really like about this strategy, and thank you for your hard work on this, Alan, with officers, is how it's seeking to address not only inequality in this city in terms of the gender balance of participation in sport, but also the geographic inequalities, which we recognise, and is something that our Labour administration is trying to tackle on multiple fronts. As you quite rightly stated, this is about improving infrastructure, which will carry on for many years, both in terms of pitch improvements and pavilions, which I'll come back to. And it's not only about improving health outcomes for people in the city, but it will let people have fun as well. And I hold that some sports are more fun than others, but people disagree with me on that. My ward colleague, Councillor Simon, since day one of us being elected, she's been pushing for the pavilion in Happy Valley Park to be reopened and refurbished. All my life it has been derelict and boarded up, but she is much older than me and remembers it not being like that, and remembers it being a hub of the park and serving residents of our community. So my question to Councillor Robbins on that is, when can teams like Woodingdean Wanderers and Rottingdean FC expect our premises to be refurbished and unlocked in the east of the city? I thank you for your work on this. I think this is exactly what we want to be unlocking in terms of future-proofing leisure facilities for our city.
Thanks very much, Councillor Allen. I've actually played football at Happy Valley when they had a decent pavilion up there. And unlike Tim and Jacob, I think playing team sports, particularly football, saved my life in some ways, because I couldn't do much else at school other than play football. But the friends I made through playing football at that time are still my friends now, which is some 60 years afterwards. And I think that speaks volumes. And I hope that everybody who gets out and plays on a Saturday and Sunday or whenever, it brings them as much joy as it did at me over the years. And now back to Walter Hall. Walter Hall is one of the community asset transfers that we're looking at, and along with Happy Valley, along with Walter Hall and Braypool, and I believe Victoria Park in Portslade. These are the three that we'll be working on, the four that we'll be working on, and hoping to progress through 2025. So, Councillor Allen, I hope that it won't be too long before people will be playing football out of decent facilities up at Happy Valley. And it is really important that we get these pavilions up and running again, because as you can imagine, we're talking about women and girls playing football. We're talking about younger groups of boys playing football. And all our pavilions and all our changing facilities and things are all set up for adult male football. So pegs are 5 foot off the ground, which isn't a lot good if you're only 3 foot tall, and various other things that need addressing. And I spoke to a friend of mine who's been involved as long as I have in grassroots football, although I'm strictly speaking not involved anymore. And he talked to me about the genuine anger that he feels that when the Premier League was set up and all the Sky Sports money was flooding into the game, that one of the justifications for all that was, look, this money are filtered down to grassroots level. And of course, it really hasn't worked that way. We now play professional footballers in the Premier League, £300,000 a week, and the money hasn't filtered down to grassroots like it was expected and really deserved to. So back to your question, Councillor Allen. Hopefully Walter Hall, I keep saying Walter Hall, Happy Valley won't be too long, and we'll keep in touch, and maybe I'll get my boots out again ready for when it starts.
I'm just going to bring Councillor Allen back in, and then I'll come to others.
Thank you, Chair. That's really positive to hear, and my residents will be delighted to hear that. And I thank Councillor Robbins for making Happy Valley happier.
Councillor Taylor, and then I'll come to Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. We often agree in Cabinet meetings, so perhaps let's change it up and have some disagreement. I wanted to strongly reject the negativity expressed by Councillor Okins and Allen about the game of rugby, which I played every year at Long Hill. Some people said I was the best fly half to ever turn out for Long Hill, but I won't comment on that. That's purely their opinion. Long Hill was somewhat different, as some of the other schools in the city, in that often rugby is seen as a private school game. Actually, we were really strong on rugby at Long Hill, and one of the reasons we were strong on rugby at Long Hill is we had access to a really good rugby pitch, which is called the Sogat Field. I don't know whether Councillor Robbins has come across it, but it was a field that was owned by a trade union called Sogat that was based in Rottingdean, bizarrely enough. The field ended up getting transferred to the private housing development that was built behind it, but the school was written into the agreement that the school would still be allowed to use the rugby pitch. So having access to those facilities, which actually some state schools may not have access to a really good rugby pitch. Is one of the reasons why Long Hill was always a strong rugby school, and I think underlines the importance of access to those playing pitches. Turning to cricket, with my other interest as long-term member of St Peter's Cricket Club, I think the biggest membership club in the city. Yeah, we've had a sort of exponential growth really over 15 years in demand for playing cricket, and in particular in our women's and girls teams, which has been amazing. But yeah, we regularly come up against the issues of pitch availability, and when you've got 6 teams turning out on the Saturday, your first and second team are all right, and your third team are all right because they're playing away, but your fourth, fifth and sixth team have to play on other pitches, and sometimes there's been occasions where you have to turn up at a pitch that is perhaps the last resort and not in the best nick, and so it is really important that we have those pitches available. And yeah, just really the last point is the one that Councillor Sankey made on school facilities, which is, I understand why schools might find it difficult to get involved in this, and it's a chore, and maybe the income doesn't represent it. But when you drive around on the weekends, most of the school pitches are not being used. So we've got to try and unlock them if we can to get rugby, cricket, football, hockey sort of played in those schools, and think about the sort of financial arrangements to try and incentivise that a little bit. So it's a sort of win-win for both the clubs and the schools. But again, reiterate thanks for the work and all the team.
Thanks, Councillor Taylor and Councillor Eaton.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Robbins, for your presentation. It's very much welcomed. I'm sure the residents of the city very much welcome this, particularly in such an active city. I'm going to, unlike Councillor Rokins and Councillor Allen and even Councillor Taylor, talk about the sport that I've never played, and that's slightly more risky, I suppose. I come from a place of some ignorance. However, I was speaking to many residents recently, even at this past weekend, where people are enthusiastic about emerging sports, and in context, in part, about Hove Beach Park, where we have installed recently a new facility for the sport of paddle, or padel, as some people in Hove choose to call it, and with great excitement. Actually, a couple of people I spoke to on Saturday evening were very keen to see that grow in our city, see a great demand for this, and even talk about tournaments and high profile, putting us on the map in the context of padel. And I believe there's other emerging sports such as pickleball as well. And so how does, within this strategy, how do we cater for emerging sports, particularly where there is a demand for that in our city, and how, not quite sure how they pick up, and might be a very high demand, or we don't quite know how that goes forward. But how do we welcome that? How do we provide for residents who are keen to play these new sports? And how does this strategy fit within that context?
Okay, well, the strategy itself only looks at those 4 sports, the rugby, hockey, cricket and football. But I do take your point so much about emerging sports like paddle, and might want to come in about this, but I think we adapted a very sensible approach with something like paddle, in that it come from nowhere and rose very quickly to be in high demand. But I think the way we looked at it is we want to think, is that demand going to continue? We don't want to turn over a lot of areas to paddle courts only to find that it was a bit of a flash in the pan and went down. It looks like the demand for paddle courts will continue, and it has become part of the mainstream sports that we provide, as is pickleball. And so we are looking at how we provide. Every week I get a different sport come and talk to us and ask if I've got a Brighton baseball team, who apparently are one of the best teams in England, and England is 16th best baseball team in the world. Imagine that. I think America's probably a long way out in front, but that's a fact. I've had things like disc golf, where you throw a frisbee on almost like a golf course and try and get it into a basket facility above. But we are aware, we are doing our very best to cater for emerging sports, and I know that there is talk of, and in fact, I think I've got a one sort of page presentation coming to us on Monday that with Dean Sports Centre are going to turn over some of their indoor tennis courts to paddle. We're looking at some of the bowls, bowling greens we had, if we can use them for paddle. So we are aware, and I don't know if Mike wants to say anything. No, yes. Yeah.
Thanks, Alan. Yeah, the playing pitch strategy itself obviously only deals with the playing pitches, cricket, football, hockey and rugby. We are aware of the demand of paddle, and we're looking at certain things across the city and opportunities where we can. We do have plans for paddle at Withdean in terms of outdoor paddle, and we anticipate private market looking at this as well, which we will then look at through the planning process. And any other emerging sports we'll take cautiously but optimistically to look at what we can provide.
Thanks very much. I also just want to have a shout out for pickleball, which I was unaware of until I was contacted by some pickleball enthusiasts in the city. It must have been about 18 months ago that were really struggling to find sites, and put them in touch with Councillor Robbins and with the team. And as I understand it, they're now much happier because we are responding and helping them to find locations. I just really want to thank and credit to Councillor Robbins and to officers for being so responsive. You know, this is what we mean when we say we're a listening and responsive council. We want people's ideas, we want to know what they need from us, and then we want to try and facilitate it. I've got Councillor Miller.
Thank you, Chair. Speaking as somebody who was diabolically bad at sports in school, and was somebody who suffered from the fact that there generally was not space or the time to devote to any more than, as it were, the first and second teams. This was in Canada, not here. But, you know, I was definitely a fifth or sixth team member at best. And I've only come to sport in later life, post breast cancer treatment. And I love the fact that there is so much more space for women, because so often women are so limited. If you're already a second, an afterthought, then it's only the very best who will have access. And actually, every one of us needs to be able to participate in sport and enjoy sport and do it at whatever level we're able to do it at. And so I love this. I do have one question. I know that the introduction of improved ancillary facilities is benefiting women and girls, and also our disabled residents. And I was wondering how we are taking sport forward to improve opportunities and access for that community as well, because it's important for every single one of us, for our well-being physically and mentally.
Thanks. I could bring Councillor Robbins in, but I just want to pause on that comment because I think it's so insightful. I think that's a really excellent contribution, Councillor Miller, that when, in a society where girls and women still too often have always come second, you're absolutely right that then, unless you were really excelling at sports, you were so far down the priority list and therefore not getting the access and the experiences and the opportunity to try and progress unless you were some sort of standout talent from a very young age. So I think that's such an important point, and even more important that we're doing what we are. Councillor Robbins.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you, and I think you're dead right. And we meet with teams. I met with Hove Park Colts, who run 29 teams now. I met with Hove Poets Corner football team who run over 20 teams. So I think that there are now all sorts of levels that people are able to participate at, and that's why it's really important to get the level of pitches up. Because when we talk to them, they and I don't even like to say it in some ways, but they still look upon the kids will play Saturday morning, the adult male will play Saturday afternoon, and then women will come along Sunday. By the time some groups get to play on that pitch, it's had 6 games on it that weekend. And if you can imagine in the depths of winter, how pitches get turned up. So it is important that we're able to get, but I think you make a really good point as well about disabled sport and participation. And there is quite I think we all know Ricky Perrin through the wheelchair basketball that he runs, and I've still got a deformed thumbnail through playing wheelchair basketball with him because my thumb caught in the wheel, and I lost my thumbnail. But yeah, so it is important, and thanks very much for highlighting that and bringing it back into focus. That we still, it's very well sort of congratulating ourselves on how well things are done, but it is still important to keep pushing forward. And by adopting this, I hope that we start to be able to attract external funding from those very bodies we're talking about, the FA, who are rolling in money, that we can perhaps draw some of that down. So again, thanks very much. And again, I don't know if you've anything you want to add, Michael, if you're, no, Mike's happy, so I'm happy.
Brilliant. Thanks everyone for all of these contributions. Such an excellent report and really, really exciting. Can I just now ask Cabinet if they're happy to agree the recommendations as outlined in this report? Agreed. Fantastic. That means we're now on to the drug and alcohol strategy, which is page 203 of the agenda. And we're going to ask Councillor Allen to introduce this item.
Thank you, Chair. Today I'm proud to introduce Brighton and Hove's new drug and alcohol strategy 2024-2030. This is a bold, compassionate and cross-cutting approach to tackling a huge health and social inequality facing our city. This strategy isn't just a set of policy documents, it's a call to action. It's rooted in the values which define us as a Labour-led council: social justice, public service and putting people first. We know the harms caused by drug and alcohol misuse are not distributed equally. They hit hardest in communities already facing the sharp edge of economic and social disadvantage: people in insecure housing, people with poor mental health, survivors of trauma and abuse, and too many of our young people. This is not acceptable and we will not turn a blind eye. This strategy acknowledges a difficult truth. Brighton and Hove has a significant issue with the negative health and social impacts of drug and alcohol abuse. Our city has the 7th highest age subsidised rates of drug misuse deaths in England. The impacts on our citizens is huge. Thousands of people using opiates and crack cocaine, and more than double the English average rate of alcohol-specific mortality rate. Similarly, the impact on our public realm, for which I'm Cabinet member, is distressing, with over 1,500 drug litter incidents managed by the council. But let me be clear, this is not a strategy of punishment. It's a strategy of prevention, protection and support. We will not criminalise poverty, addiction or trauma. This strategy sets out 3 core priorities shaped by our local data, consultation and the voices of people with experience of drug harm in our city. Firstly, disrupting the local supply of drugs and reducing drug-related crime. We will not tolerate exploitation of children, of vulnerable people or of our neighbourhoods. Through a whole community approach and strengthened partnerships with police, community safety, housing teams, we will make Brighton and Hove safer. This is in accordance with our Police and Crime Commissioner for Sussex's aim to be relentless in disrupting drug-related crime. We will secondly deliver a world-class person-centred treatment and recovery service. Every resident deserves access to the help they need when they need it. We will boost access to treatment, improve quality, and ensure that people with complex needs, mental health challenges, and homelessness get joined up support and are not passed from service to service. And thirdly, achieving a generational shift in perspectives. This means challenging the normalisation of drug and alcohol misuse and ensuring drug usage amongst children and the next generation is not a guaranteed inevitability. Our work is backed by over 10 million in public investment this year alone, funding that reflects this council's commitment to public health and prevention work. But more importantly, it's backed by our values. So let me state these values outright. Addiction is a health issue, not a moral failing. Recovery is possible and everyone deserves that support. And public services should uplift and support people, not stigmatise or exclude. This strategy doesn't shy away from complexity. Our manifesto in 2023 promised to crack down on drugs. And I know that sounds harsh, but we want to crack down on drugs, not drug users. Brighton and Hove is known across the country for our progressive values. And with this strategy, we are turning those values into action, creating safer communities, better health, and liberation from the harms of drug addiction and misuse.
Thanks very much, Councillor Allen, for that really clear, I think, articulation of the principles and the values and the objectives that we are seeking to achieve in what can be quite a complex area. Really appreciate your work and the thoughtfulness of how you presented it. Questions and comments from colleagues. I've got Councillor Williams.
Thank you for this report, and it's very welcome indeed, I can tell you. I'm particularly interested in so much in this. I've chosen one area to look at, work stream 1, where we're looking at increasing support and communications to communities that are experiencing drug and alcohol related crime and antisocial behaviour. This is so important that we focus on this. I deal with myself in my area, so many communities that have been affected in very many ways because of these issues. So I really welcome this. And the strengthening of a multi-agency drug-related harm meeting, I think, is really important. We do have some, but it needs strengthening and they need teeth. And I'm particularly interested in looking at and understanding how police presence can be strengthening and these issues in tackling them in identified hotspots. And I'm particularly interested in preventative policing in particular hotspots as well. And I wonder if you could tell me a little bit more about that.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Those are very on the ball observations. I mean, certainly when we all got elected, I remember all the Labour councils had an away day, and there was a section where we discussed some of the drug problems in our wards. And for me, that was a complete insight, because for me, that's not really an issue in my ward, but for other areas, it's really significant and really damaging to community cohesion. Certainly, joined up practice and ensuring that people aren't passing the buck is a really important part of the overall strategy. We need to make sure that that there's a really cross-cutting network of services, so that housing know what the police's angle is, the police know what the NHS providers are doing. I mean, we need to make sure, does the custody sergeant know where to reach out if, for example, a client that's clearly undergone domestic abuse and addiction, how can we even start to untangle that so that we can help that person? But in terms of specifics around antisocial behaviour, certainly we want to not only increase support but increase communication with those communities, so that people know that even if they've reported incidents that's going on, sometimes even on their doorstep in places like Brunswick and Adelaide and Kemp Town, that it doesn't just evaporate into the ether, but it's certainly building up intelligence for us to help people struggling with addiction and misuse.
Thank you, Councillor Williams and Councillor Allen. Any more comments or questions on the drugs and alcohol strategy? I've got Councillor Miller.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I really welcome the multi-agency approach. I'm regularly contacted by tourism businesses in the centre of the city, which is an area which has high experiences high levels of antisocial behaviour. And in the end, what the antisocial behaviour really is driven by are problems with addiction, both drugs and alcohol. And we cannot improve our residents' and visitors' experience of being in the city and make life easier for our residents and businesses if we simply try to criminalise the people who are going through the experiencing addiction. So I really welcome the fact that we're looking at this in a holistic way so that we can actually improve lives for everybody, because in the end, it doesn't just affect the people experiencing addiction, it's their families, it's their neighbours, it's their communities. It affects every one of us, more so in some areas. I also, like Councillor Allen, am from an area where antisocial behaviour isn't such a problem. But in the end, I still want to visit every part of the city, as do my residents, and I want to feel safe. And I know, and I believe that every one of these people, I have family members who are in Canada living on the streets, dealing with addiction, and it's hard. And one of the biggest problems is when agencies do not actually look at that problem holistically, but insist that one portion, like one particular aspect, mental health or addiction, are tackled and solved, as it were, before they can be housed. And actually, you need everything happening together, because how are you going to deal with an addiction if you don't know where you're going to be sleeping tonight? So and if you don't know what you're going to be eating, and then it just keeps spiraling and it gets worse and worse. And so if we can create a holistic approach in this city, our chances of creating a happier, healthier city for every one of us is so much better. So I really welcome the strategy. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Councillor Miller. Any other comments or questions? I'm just going to add then and echo, I think, what others have kind of got at here. How holistic and integrated this strategy seems, as Councillor Miller said, in terms of the partnership working. When we first took over the administration just over 2 years ago, as I referenced in my chair's comms, the city has always had challenges and issues in this area. It's something that's touched the life of my friends and family. And that said, I don't think the extent to which the visible scars of having a significant number of people living with addiction, the extent to which that had become, I think, much more visible in recent years was shocking and is shocking. And we know that there are complex underlying social causes, and we know that austerity and removing hope and the undermining of public services that so often play a preventative role in keeping people safe and able to address issues through means other than falling into the trap of addiction. With so much harm done to that by the previous Conservative government, it's clear, what that trajectory was and what that has led to. So it's so important to see this strategy in response to, as I say, that kind of escalation, I would say, of visible harm. I was able to go and visit some of our treatment centres and to speak to those services that are operating on the front line in supporting people. And what I was really struck by was the extent to which our services are very well knitted together, the sophistication, I think, of our approach in understanding how you best support people into recovery in terms of the right timing, the right approach. As Councillor Miller says, ensuring that people's various needs are being met so that they're able to engage. But also really struck by the success stories. As you said in your opening remarks, Councillor Allen, recovery is possible. Recovery is possible. And I think it's really important to keep drilling home that message, because ultimately you need to ensure that there is hope and the possibility of change, and that people can believe in that to start the transition into recovery. I want to thank everyone that is working in this area, from people that are on the front line to those that have knitted together this strategy and are spearheading the partnership working approach. And this is one area I would love us as a city to make real gains, transformative gains, and as this strategy identifies, really break down some of that intergenerational impact that addiction otherwise has. So thanks very much, everybody, for your work. And if Cabinet are happy, we will agree this strategy and the recommendations in the report. Agreed. Thanks, everybody. Lastly, we are on to the Targeted Budget Management Report, and I'm going to ask Councillor Taylor to introduce this item.
Thank you, Chair. So this targeted budget management report is effectively the final one for the previous financial year. It's the provisional outturn report, which in layman's terms tells us how we did for the financial year. Did we come in on budget or over budget or under budget? I actually thought I'd start with the context, which is to go all the way down to point 911 in the report, which shows a graph. It's page 273 in the file I'm looking at. And that graph is a comparative graph that shows all of the other unitary English authorities in the country, and it takes their working balance or their general reserve as a percentage of their overall revenue spend. In other words, your cash in the bank, your reserves for a rainy day, how do they compare to your typical amount of money you're spending each year on revenue services? And the graph shows that we have some of the lowest reserves in the country for an English unitary authority. And that reserve position followed 2 years ago a position where the Green administration overspent the General Revenue Fund by over £3 million. And that overspend had to come from our reserves, and our reserves went down from 9 million to under 6 million, putting us in that position that's shown on the graph today. I think there's a reasonable case to be made that even at 9 million, those are probably quite low reserves, especially compared to other authorities in the country. And so within that context, the authority is in a difficult position, and there isn't much wiggle room for mistakes and unforeseen financial circumstances that could put us in a difficult position. So in that context, I'm glad that the report that we're looking at today shows that for the last financial year, 24-25, the council did indeed have an underspend on their general fund budget of just over £1 million. That was down to the really, really hard work of staff at every level of the organisation, senior managers right down to those operating on the front line, because through most of the year, as Cabinet members will remember, we had a forecast overspend, at some points a significant one, and so we had to put in place financial restrictions and controls, spending controls, to some extent hiring controls, although there were key hires allowed to be made in certain areas. And we understand as a cabinet that puts a huge amount of pressure on the services. It puts a huge amount of pressure on employees because they're sometimes having to do the same job but with one staff member short, or they're having to try and provide the same service but whilst controlling discretionary spend. So a huge thank you from Cabinet to all senior officers and all officers throughout the organisation that did the hard work throughout the year to make sure we came in on track and came in on the budget, which, as I say, was really important in the context of our very, very low reserves. Because of that context of the low reserves, the recommendation in the report, and my recommendation, is that we pay back some of that working balance that had been drawn down, and we pay it back earlier than had been expected. That doesn't by no means put us out of the woods as a local authority and say that everything is now perfect from an financial perspective. We're still in a very difficult position, but repaying that balance early will put us in a more stable position. It would be certainly the advice of our external auditors, and I think they'll be pleased to see that we're taking that proactive measure to replenish the working balance. And it's also worth remembering that within all this context of a difficult financial position and having to manage within budget, we're still delivering as a council. I think some of the opposition and some members of the public say, oh, it's no great achievement really coming in on budget. We care about services. Well, let's remind ourselves what we've been doing. Unlike previous administration, we've been reopening and refurbishing toilets. We've been looking after our parks and refurbishing our parks and facilities all around the city. A big focus on potholes and sorting out our roads, more money from government, but more money locally, by the way, because managing a budget is not a mark of someone who's a fiscal conservative or is just trying to make the pennies out. That's not what it's about. Managing the budget properly means that you can unlock and deliver the frontline services that people want. The overspend previously was not something that was progressive and we're protecting services. No, that simply passed it on to the next council to have to deal with. But we think we've managed the budget well, and obviously officers doing the day-to-day management of budget. And so it's a good result from the authority. It doesn't put us out of the woods by any means. And indeed, we will see in the first couple of months of the new financial year that there are very, very significant pressures, particularly in the area of temporary accommodation on our budget. And so it will be another hard year for officers and for members to make sure that we can manage. But it's a good position. I'll reiterate my thanks to the finance team and ask members to support the recommendations in the report. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much, Councillor Taylor. Comments and questions on TBM, Councillor Meakin.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Taylor, for your presentation. I'm very pleased not only have Labour responsibly balanced the books, but achieved a £1 million underspend. Great achievement in itself. Unlike the Green Party, who applied the principle of raising parking fees to stimulate demand, to quote, increasing parking fees by some 50% over the 3 years they were in administration, with more hikes baked into their 2023 budget. This Labour administration have taken a more financially responsible and sustainable approach, stopped planned hikes, and promptly set up a comprehensive citywide parking review. Further, this year, we took the bold and decisive move to freeze residential and visitor parking permit fees, having already lowered council car park fees last autumn. Unlike the Greens, we have not imposed punitive tax increases on car owners that disproportionately affect lower income residents and visitors. Our more holistic approach supports our public services and businesses, helps key workers travelling to their workplace out of hours, and offers more choice through our improved public transport and active travel options. This approach helps reduce traffic congestion to improve air quality and cleaner environment, all contributing to a more vibrant, fair and inclusive city, better for all. Perhaps to some, this may be counterintuitive. Would Councillor Taylor agree that our approach to freezing parking fees this year is responsible, welcome, progressive and positive, enhancing our sound financial management within a fairer, more sustainable and better for economic health of the city?
So, yeah, thank you for that, Councillor Green. I certainly do agree with that. I think the authority and the city basically reached the end of that strategy, which was permanent putting up of parking fees, because we started to see demand falling off in some areas. And then what do? You start having to chase that. And it didn't really work. It was, I think, a pretty flawed strategy. As we have said in response, this is not about wanting to get cars charging into the city when they weren't previously. You know, in many cases, the cars were already there in the zones that were already busy. But we had to be clear that absolutely punitive parking charges is not good for residents in the outlying areas who may sometimes need to drive in, and it's not good for the visitor economy. And I think the direction that we're going in, although it will be difficult because of the financial pressure, but the direction we've gone in trying to freeze parking fees and try and make them a little bit more reasonable, I think is the right one for the city. And of course, as we've said, Councillor Newton, the way that we get more active travel is by having good active travel schemes, good buses, and good pavements that are walkable, and good roads that are nice to travel on in buses. So yeah, certainly support that.
Thanks, Councillor Taylor and Councillor Meakin. Further comments on TBM, Councillor Miller.
I just want to say a huge thank you to Councillor Taylor and to our past and present CFOs, Nigel Manville and John Hooton, and all the officers who I know have worked incredibly hard to deliver this outcome. I see it with the teams I work with, and I assume it's exactly the same for every one of my colleagues. And it has required a huge amount of effort and thinking and long hours on the part of senior officers. And I really think, I just want to say thank you, because I think we've delivered amazingly for the council and the city.
Thank you, Councillor Miller. Completely agree and endorse those comments. Any more comments or questions for Councillor Taylor on TBM? Councillor Okins.
Just a very quick comment, actually, building on what Councillor Miller just said, and I suppose just to thank officers and staff up and down the council. Really, the council is always having to, every year we go through the cycle of having to make savings and then deliver budgets in year. And I know it's really, really hard. And I know how hard everyone works. And I've certainly had many experiences where, I'm sending emails late at night and at weekends and getting immediate replies. And it really, really shouldn't be like that. So just want to say to everyone really that, we see you and we appreciate all the hard work.
Thanks, Councillor Okins. Really important acknowledgement and echo that wholeheartedly. Comments, questions on TBM? No. Fab. In which case, thanks very much to Councillor Taylor for the presentation and for kind of talking us through that and the recent history. I think absolutely the right decision to pay this back into our reserves. We are absolutely determined to put this council on a more sustainable financial footing. Should also reference in that context that we will be engaging with the government's recent consultation on fair funding and reforms to how local authorities are funded. I think in principle we are absolutely supportive of the principle of ensuring that areas of high deprivation are getting their rightful share of resources. I'm also pleased that the government has signalled the direction of travel being about finding a much more nuanced approach to local authority funding. So taking into account, for example, the fact that in a city like ours, where we have a high number of students that are not, that we're not receiving council tax from, that's going to put some pressure on our finances. Equally, we completely support the fact that there is a single person discount in council tax, but that also is not something that is factored in when the government is currently making its formula and allocations between councils. So appreciate the fact that the government has been clear that they're going to look at that as well. We need a nuanced settlement in terms of fair funding that takes account of each authority's individual circumstances. And I think there are a number of ways in which Brighton and Hove has quite unique pressures, both from, as I say, student population, high number of single person households, also the fact that we're obviously a very vibrant visitor economy, but don't yet have powers to bring in a tax from tourism. So really looking to government to support us in our mission to make this council financially sustainable. Are colleagues happy to agree the recommendations in this report? Agreed. Fantastic. Thank you very much, everybody. That then brings us to the end of our substantive proceedings here this afternoon. And I will now call this meeting to a close. Thanks very much and have a good rest of your day.